bone marrow edema in each of them to differentiate one from the other because they have different management as we will see. Understanding breast pain has been always a diagnostic challenge for radiologists and head surgeons, and impaction syndromes related to the underside pain are common. Still, unfortunately, they are commonly overlooked due to their subtle imaging findings in many cases, as we will see, and therefore combination of the clinical and conventional plain X-ray and MRI findings is often necessary to confirm the presence and to exclude other entities with similar clinical presentation. The infection syndromes related to the underside of the breast pain are the ulnar infection syndrome, the ulnar impingement syndrome, the undercarpal infection secondary to non-union of the ulnar styloid process, the ulnar styloid infection syndrome, and the hematounate impingement syndrome. And of all of these, of course, the most common is the ulnar infection syndrome. As we can see, they have names that seem to be similar to each other, but they are totally different as we will see. I will start by the most common and the most famous one, which is the ulnar infection syndrome, or the other name, the ulnar abutment syndrome. This is a degenerative condition on the underside of the breast related to excessive load between the ulnar head triangular fibrocartilage and the underside of the cartilage. And the pathologic conditions most commonly that happen with the ulnar infection syndrome most commonly occur with positive ulnar variants. But this is not necessary. I can diagnose ulnar infection syndrome with the same spectrum of pathologic findings in patients with neutral or negative ulnar variants. The risk factors will be the positive ulnar variance. What's the ulnar variance? The ulnar variance refers to the length of the distal articular surface of the ulna relative to the radius, and this is measured by drawing a tangential line parallel to the distal distal articular surface of the radius, actually the medial part of the distal articular surface, and we will see how the ulnar head projects proximal or distal to this line. If it projects proximal to this line, this is the positive ulnar variance. If they are both at the same level, this is the neutral variance, and if the ulnar head projects more proximal to the relative to the distal radius, this is the negative ulnar variance. The other risk factors include the non-union of the distal radius, the premature physical closure of distal radial sizes, and previous radial head resection, and the last three causes, these are causes of short radius or relative lengthening of the ulna relative to the abnormally short radius. The chronic infection between the ulnar head, the triangular fibrocartilage, and the underside of the corpus will result in a continuum or spectrum of pathologic changes which starts by degenerative changes and degenerative tear of the triangular fibrocartilage, chondromalacia of the lunate, triquetral, and distal ulnar head, tear of the lunotriquetral ligament, and finally osteoarthritis at the underside of the breast and the undercarpal and distal radioulnar joints. And it's very important to concentrate here that the early changes are confined to the ulnar side of the lunate and the radial side of the triquetral. This is very important to differentiate it from the distribution of bone marrow edema and chondromalacia from the other infection symptoms. The plain X-ray will be able to identify the positive ulnar variance, as we see here that the ulnar head is projecting more distal to the radius, and all other abnormalities like this patient with malunited distal radial fracture resulting in shortening of the radius relative to the ulnar. By MRI, we will identify the rest of the spectrum of pathological conditions. In the early stage, we can identify chondromalacia of the articular cartilage at the ulnar head and the underside of the corpus, subchondral marrow edema at typical locations at underside of lunate and radial side of triquetral, and further progression will lead to development of cystic changes, maybe sclerotic changes, which will be hyperintense in both T1 and T2 weighted of the neurotracheal ligament. In early stages, we may identify just subtle mineral edema like this, and we can notice that here the patient it has a neutral variance of by MRI. By the way, it's good, it's better to comment on the ulnar variance by plain X-ray, not by MRI, because by plain X-ray there is adequate positioning of the patient and the patient rest during acquisition. And this is better to be able to comment on the ulnar variance. But with MRI, we have here neutral variance, and we can identify just bone marrow edema at the underside of the unit with no other appreciable abnormalities, and even the triangular fibrocartilage is intact. And only this subtle finding or only this minimal finding is enough to suggest that there is early ongoing process of ulnar abutment syndrome. Another more advanced case here, we find that there is chondromalacia. Chondromalacia is identified by the irregularity of the articular cartilage at the ulnar side of the unit, related subchondral cystic and edematous marrow changes, central tear of triangular fibrocartilage, and partial tear of the neurotracheal ligament, and this is the full spectrum of the ulnar abutment syndrome. Another advanced case with the cystic changes and at the typical distribution, underside of unit, radial side of triquetrum, central perforation of triangular fibrocartilage, and partial tear of the neurotracheal ligament. So this was the first one and the most common one, and we saw the distribution of the bone marrow edema. The next one is the ulnar impingement syndrome, and this is totally different story. This is not synonymous to the ulnar impaction syndrome. This is not synonymous to the ulnar impaction syndrome, because ulnar impingement syndrome is caused by short distal ulna that impinge on the distal radius proximal to the sigmoid notch. Here, this is the reverse of the ulnar abutment syndrome. This is short ulna relative to the radius. The risk factors include markedly shortened distal ulna, which may be caused by previous surgical resection due to correction of midline deformity or in advanced rheumatoid arthritis, for example, or de novo cases of negative ulnar variance, or premature fusion of distal ulnar fracture with malunion causing shortening of the distal ulna. The radiographic changes of the ulnar impingement syndrome may include just focal remodeling proximal to the sigmoid notch at the ulnar side of the distal radius and at the ulnar head with flattening of the opposing surfaces. And in more advanced stage, we may find that there is frank erosive changes at the underside of the distal radius, proliferative bony changes, and sclerotic changes at the ulnar, at both the underside of the distal radial shaft and the ulnar stump. By MRI, we can identify the similar changes as we identified at the plain X-ray. We may identify also related marrow edema if it's present, and there is of course deformation of the triangular fibrocartilage by the markedly shortened ulna. The third one is the ulnar carpal impaction syndrome, secondary to ulnar styloid malunion. The ulnar styloid malunion following trauma is common, and we have two types of non-united styloid process fractures. The first one is the type 1, which is non-united tip. And this non-united tip is not associated with avulsion of ulnar attachment of triangular fibrocartilage because it's distal to the ulnar attachment of triangular fibrocartilage. And type 2 is the non-united base of ulnar styloid process, and this is associated, as we can see, by avulsive ulnar attachment of triangular fibrocartilage. But both types are associated with loose bony fragment, which will continuously irritate the ulnar side of the triquetrum. Here the location is different from the ulnar abutment. Here we are dealing with the ulnar side of the triquetrum, causing chondromalacia and subsequently there will be subchondral marrow changes. So the changes here will be on the ulnar side of the triquetrum. MR is an excellent imaging modality to visualize the integrity of the triangular fibrocartilage, as in this case is non-united, this is type 2 non-union of the ulnar styloid process with above ulnar attachment of triangle fiber cartilage. And here we can see that there is early chondromalacia, early signal filtration at the underside of the triquetrum, and this is in the appropriate clinical context with the patient complaining of underside breast pain just enough to suggest that there is an ongoing ulnar carpal infection secondary to these non-united styloid process fracture. The fourth one is the ulnar styloid impaction syndrome. The ulnar styloid impaction syndrome is caused by impaction between an excessively long styloid process and the triquetrum. Here, the ulnar styloid process should be excessively long. And to comment whether it's excessively long or not, we use what we call the ulnar styloid process index, which is calculated by subtracting the degree of ulnar values, which is the difference of length between the distal articular surface of radius and ulnar head from the length of the ulnar styloid process, and the difference between them will be divided by the transverse diameter of the ulnar head. This is the ulnar styloid process index, and normally it should be 0.2. If it's increased more than this, it means that the ulnar styloid process is extremely longer than normal or taller than normal. So the diagnosis of this condition is based primarily on identification first of excessively long styloid process, ulnar styloid process, and MRI will show the chondromalacia and the proximal and the subchondral nerve changes, which will be on the ulnar side of the triquetrum. Plain X-ray will demonstrate the elongated styloid process. Here, the MRI of a different patient, but here we can notice that it's not extremely long, but it's thicker than normal. It's thicker here, the height is not extremely longer than normal, but it's thicker than normal. And we can find the characteristic MRI findings of the ulnar styloid impaction with the chondromalacia with signal alteration of the articular cartilage at the ulnar side of triquetrum, and ulnar head with subchondral marrow edema on both sides. And here there is an associated central perforation of the triangular fiber cartilage. And here in the coronal gradient, the same changes, we can identify the chondromalacia and the central perforation of the triangular fiber cartilage with this abnormally thick ulnar styloid infection and this distribution of the bone marrow edema at this characteristic location at ulnar head and ulnar side of triquetrum. This is suggested in a patient with complaining of underside breast pain of this type of ulnar styloid infection syndrome. The last one is the hamatoneonate infection syndrome, and this is related to a normal anatomic variant which could be present. Normally, the unate articulate distally with the capitate with a single facet, but sometimes there is an extra facet with an articulation between the unate and the capitate on one facet, and the other facet will articulate with the hamate. This is what we call the type 2 unate. This type 2 unate cause altered mechanics at the level of the rest and mid-carpal joints, causing this type of hamatoneonate impingement. It will cause here the location is totally different. Here the chondromalacia and the subchondral marrow changes will be at the level of the distal unate and proximal hamate in patients with type 2 units. So by MRI, we first identify the extra facet of the unate articulated with the hamate with related chondromalacia and subchondral marrow edema at the proximal hamate. Again, the identification of this extra facet to identify the type 2 unit and the related signal alteration of the overlying articular cartilage and the subchondral edematous marrow changes at the proximal hamate in the head suppression surface. So to summarize, at the outer side of the rest, we have 5 types of impingement syndromes or impaction syndromes. The first one, to differentiate between them, we look at the X-ray. If I have positive ulnar variance in the acute clinical context, of course, we can think about the ulnar impaction syndrome, and we will proceed by MRI to identify the rest of spectrum of this of the pathological condition of this disorder. If we have short ulnar, we can think about the ulnar impingement syndrome. If we have non-united styloid process fracture, we can think about the ulnar carpal impaction secondary to the ulnar styloid non-union. If we have excessively long styloid process, we can think about the ulnar styloid impaction syndrome. And finally, if we identify high-foot unit, we can think about the hemifoot unit impingement syndrome. Thank you for your attention.
البداية طبعا أحب أن أقدم بالشكر للأستاذ الخارج على دعوته الكريمة والأستاذ الدكتورة علي الشريعة السليم واللجنة المنظمة الدكتور هشام مطر والأستاذ محمد سامي